Today, we joined a discussion with the Tampa-based COO Forum on the impact of blockchain and Bitcoin on U.S. business. I'm joined by Eric Grill, CEO of ChainBytes and one of the world's leading experts on blockchain and Bitcoin. Sargon Shamas, COO of Space Machine and Engineering Corporation and a member of the Tampa-based COO Forum, also joins the discussion. Okay, so welcome to our discussion on Bitcoin and blockchain in business. I'm joined by Eric Grill today, who is the CEO of ChainBytes and well known around the world as an expert in blockchain and Bitcoin. And he's actually joining us from San Salvador today, where he's down on business. And I think anybody who knows about anything about Bitcoin is aware of all the news that's gone on in the last 8 or 9 months about El Salvador adopting Bitcoin as a currency. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. I also have Sargon Shamas, who's the COO of Space Machine and Engineering Corp here in Tampa Bay area. So welcome, guys. Eric, we were chatting a little bit before we officially started about some of the topics around things like blockchain and Bitcoin. And, you know, Bitcoin is coming to the U.S., like it or not. There are a lot of people already invested in it. Companies are looking at it. The government's trying to figure out how they want to deal with it. And what are your thoughts on that as far as Bitcoin in the U.S.?
Oh, the Bitcoin's already here in the U.S. It's been here for a while. It will continue to be here. It's highly regulated. You know, people think that it's not regulated at all. We're regulated on a federal level, and on some states have also regulated it. You know, what are my thoughts on it being in the United States? We have a working financial system, so it's not as maybe not as much of an opportunity to make a difference in people's lives in the United States as it is elsewhere. But it's significant and important, as we're seeing now with inflation and probably shortly to be hyperinflation. It is the best inflation hedge in the world. And I think people will start realizing that. Certainly institutional investors are realizing it and they're hedging against it. It's turned into the new digital gold. I mean, that's just like scratching the surface of what Bitcoin or blockchain is going to do as a whole. That's just it as a money. It is the best money we've ever seen on the planet by far. But that's just like saying the internet is email. It's not, right? That was just back in 1980. That was the only thing you had. You didn't have the internet. You had email, and it turned into the internet, and on and on and on. And that's what we have here. We're at the very, very beginning stages of this technology that is going to disintermediate, just completely disrupt all these industries where there's a counterfeiting problem, a supply chain problem, a finance problem, a liquidity problem, a transparency problem, a governance problem. It will solve all those things and through different mechanisms that it has. Kind of a long answer, but yeah.
No, it's a good answer. It's very interesting. I'm curious, of course, when we go past just Bitcoin itself, we were talking a lot about blockchain. And the blockchain technology is really an amazing technology. And you want to talk a little bit about that, because I think from there, when you start talking about things like smart contracts or hyperledger, you're creating a lot of things that are invaluable for businesses.
So blockchain, I mean, Bitcoin and blockchain are one and the same. Bitcoin really, I mean, for all intents and purposes, doesn't exist. What Bitcoin is a representation of addresses on a blockchain, which happens to be the Bitcoin blockchain. That sounds a little confusing. So let's get into what blockchain is. It's an immutable database, which means it can't be changed. You can add things to it. So let's say I want to transfer something from me to Tracy. I would have a private key that proves that I have ownership of this value, and I'm going to transfer that to Tracy. I digitally sign it, cryptographically sign it. I send it to Tracy, and it goes onto the blockchain. And so now that Bitcoin has now moved over to Tracy, and everybody in the world can now see on the blockchain that it's moved over there. Now, when he wants to go send it, it doesn't get changed. It just gets added to. So it says, oh, it went to him, and then later on it went to this guy. So it has a chain of all of those transactions. But the blockchain itself is just literally a database, and you add records on top of it, and then you have like a checksum in between there saying, okay, this is the value of what's in here, so nothing can be changed in here. And then that checksum is used into the next one and the next one. And so when they're talking about when you send Bitcoin and confirmations, That's how many layers are sitting on top of your transaction. So when my initial transaction goes to Tracy, that's a block. I guess maybe I should get into blocks. Okay, we're gonna get into blockchain. So Bitcoin. So we'll talk about Bitcoin. There's a lot of different cryptocurrencies, but Bitcoin is certainly the king. So let's talk about what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is a blockchain with 10-minute blocks. Each block now you're getting, I think, 6.25 Bitcoins every 10 minutes. So someone in the world or some group in the world gets the reward. And what they get rewarded for is protecting the network and verifying all the transactions. So that what they're doing is they're using a tremendous amount of computational power to validate these transactions and then put it onto a database and share it with everybody. And for that, they're rewarded with the block reward as well as the transaction fees that are on the chain, and that gets spread out between them. So that's how the blockchain gets created. That's how it gets. That's how it's protected, and that's how it's distributed. Anyone in the world can read it. Everyone can participate. I have blockchain running on multiple devices, from a Raspberry Pi to, you can put it on your phone. Well, maybe not on your phone anymore. But it's a little big, but you can store this and you can validate this anywhere in the world, and that's powerful because you don't have a central authority holding the keys. You don't have to go to the courthouse and say, who owns this real estate? You don't have to do that. You can go on the blockchain and say, it's owned by this person, 100%. There is no, we went into a lot of countries and there are books and records on real estate. Nobody knows who owns the property. How is that even possible, right? We don't do that in the United States, or we think we don't. We have title insurance and things like that. So again, those are sort of things. Again, another long-winded answer.
Let's talk about for a second a little bit about Bitcoin mining. We were discussing that, and if you read the press, depending on who you're reading, the naysayers of blockchain are like, oh, it's so terribly inefficient and it uses too much energy. And then you have the president of El Salvador, who is building a power plant that takes geothermal energy and basically is clean energy and will make this available to miners. And then, of course, you also, anytime you have something like this, you have the scammers in there as well. And could you maybe talk about that side of the industry a little bit?
Sure. So on the mining side, I'll talk about what miners are in a minute, but I'll talk about the energy consumption issue, which was really probably brought to light when Elon Musk got involved in Bitcoin and made an issue out of it, and everyone took notice of it. It was the dirty little secret of Bitcoin that most of the Bitcoin was being mined with coal. Now, having said that, our current financial system that it's replacing uses a tremendous amount more energy and power than this does. People look at the inefficiency of the miners that are running in place, but that's not inefficient. That's by design. That you have to have proof of work. If you don't understand Bitcoin, that's when you start talking about that. Proof of work is important. It's important that it costs something, because if it doesn't cost something, nobody has I'll give you an example. If you're on an airplane and there's one person on the airplane that wants the airplane to crash, you have 99 other people there that don't want the airplane to crash. They're going to try to stop that one person that wants the airplane to crash. However, if that one person is simply just, hey, I want you to go up and down a little bit, it doesn't affect anybody, nobody's going to care. There's no impact on it. So nobody's going to get involved. Nobody's going to do anything about it. He's going to run free. That's the same thing with Bitcoin. If you have bad actors and there's no loss to the network, like right now we're talking about a $800 billion mechanism that if somebody let through a bad transaction would really compromise the system, it's just not going to happen. And that's what proof of work is, and that's why it's important. But back to the mining, what the miners do for the blockchain is protect it and validate it and provide the services for it. So in this example with the airplane, right, that one person could be a bad miner. All those other miners are going to say, your transaction is not correct, and we're not going to accept it. And so that's what happens. And then randomly one of the miners is picked as the authority, and everybody agrees, and he's rewarded for that. But in essence, what they are is the infrastructure of Bitcoin. It's a decentralized network, and it's run by the miners. The miners protect the network. They add the transactions into it. They validate the transactions. They're an integral part of it. Now, what you're talking about on the investment side on mining, my opinion is, you're just better off buying Bitcoin than investing in mining equipment, especially if you're new to this. You may want to play around with it. Go buy some mining equipment, play around with it. I certainly did 10 years ago when I got into Bitcoin. I bought some mining equipment, and they're little basic ASICs, and but I learned a lot about how the transactions happen, how to fiddle with mining to do better with it and things like that. So but I'm a programmer, so maybe maybe I got a little deeper into the weeds than most people would, but it was an education. It definitely educated me better on how the transactions work, and I could see it and really be a part of it. There's a lot of mining pools out there today where people they're taking people's money and they're consolidating it. You have huge companies that have big mining pools and things like that. I would say if you want to invest in those, go ahead and invest in like Marathon or one of those larger pools. They're going to be down here in El Salvador mining Bitcoin down here, I'm sure. At some point, they have things in Texas. But I am going to tell you one thing. In 5 years, or maybe it'll take 10 years, most of the energy companies will actually be mining operations. Mark my words, you heard it here.
There you go. First prophecy from Eric for today.
Well, Texas is probably going to be the first place that does it. They're already working on that now, because Texas is separated from the rest of the network. And as you saw when they had the freezing, they have problems with their grid, and they can't scale up, they can't scale down. Now, if they had mining equipment and they were already scaled up with mining equipment and they had an emergency, they could scale down the mining and be able to fulfill their customers. So that's definitely going to be something that they do, that they can ramp up and have a huge amount of energy produced, and be able to distribute it to the customers when they need it. But at the same time, when it's not, instead of dumping it and wasting it, which is what they would do if they just produced it, they're able to benefit from it with mining. So there you go. That's my prediction.
So you brought up Texas. Let's talk about a couple other places, Eric, since we're on that subject. How about Wyoming? There's a big state with very few people, but they have been really aggressively looking at how to become a player in this field. Your thoughts?
Yeah, there's quite a few influential people there in Wyoming that have done a tremendous job of getting laws passed to help the entire community. As a matter of fact, one of the projects we're doing here in El Salvador, we're going to end up registering a company in Wyoming because of that. And so Wyoming did a lot of different things, but one of the main things that, from my perspective, that they did that was very interesting is they put a framework in for DAOs, which are distributed autonomous organizations, which is a little bit more complicated here, but it's a layer that sits on top of blockchain as a governance layer. And so what they did was they passed a law recognizing DAOs as just simple LLCs. So if I want to operate so say I form a DAO in Wyoming and I'm operating in Florida, that's okay. I can register as a foreign entity in Florida as just a simple LLC. There's frameworks in place for all this already. They bridged the gap between the two worlds. What they also did was provide a sandbox for developers and projects to be able to create securities or things that are a little bit outside of the box and not have to worry about the SEC coming down on them. And that's one of the chilling things that's going on right now, is that they're going after developers, they're going after people, they're going after innovation, and they're stifling it, and it's being sent offshore because nobody wants to build anything here in the United States and go through the whole regulatory process. They want to leave, build it, and okay, great, if they can come back and get through the regulatory process, or they will, but most of that innovation is going to happen overseas. Wyoming may change that, because now, hey, I can go create a security in Wyoming, tell them what I'm doing, build all these cool things, test it out, and if there's a problem, there is an authority there in Wyoming that can address it. So we'll see. But that's one of many things that Wyoming has done. There's a bank that's being created out of there for Bitcoin, which is problematic in Bitcoin. There's a lot of really good things that have come out of Wyoming and Texas, honestly, mostly Wyoming.
So let's throw in a third one. I've been reading a lot. We have a new mayor in New York City, one of the financial capitals, of the great financial capitals of the world. And, we always talk about trying to do business and crypto and stuff in New York as being a pain in the butt. But there's a lot of people saying, hey, this new mayor is going to bring a lot of change and try to make New York City one of the big players in that. So prophecy number 2, Eric, what's the reality?
Never going to happen.
Somehow I knew you would say that.
He's not going to get rid of he thinks he's going to get rid of the bit license. Like, no, the banks own New York, and they're not going to allow Bitcoin to come in and eat their lunch. The law that's in New York right now is called the bit license. Banks are exempt from it. So if you're a bank, you don't need to register with the DFAS, which is obviously unfair. The requirements that they put into this thing are so above and beyond anything that literally anyone on the planet has done, and they want to keep you out. And then the approval process is costly, time consuming, and not likely. I think there's only been 6 companies that have been through the whole process. The guy that created the law, after he created the law, left it, went to work for Ripple, created his own thing to help people to get through it. I mean, yeah, I have nothing nice to say about that. No.
That's funny. You write a nice complex law so that your next career is guaranteed. There you go.
He did. Like, I'm sure he's making the bucks.
Man, I'm in the wrong business, I guess.
Nah, come on. That's a shady way to make money.
Um,
History is not going to look kindly on the guy. I can tell you that.
do you think Bitcoin, 10 years from now, where's Bitcoin going to be in the US? We've seen, like, you mentioned Elon earlier. One minute he's pro Bitcoin, then he's against it, then he's back. Tesla way going back and forth about accepting Bitcoin for payment. I mean, do you see this as being Bitcoin transaction being very common in the next 10 years? Or are they just going to, is the US just going to get left behind? We're already getting left behind in this technology. So is that going to continue, or you think reality is going to hit?
We're not really being left behind in the technology. You're sort of restricted. So like what I said, where people are going offshore to build this stuff, their eye is still on the United States. And the United States is still the biggest market in the world. So, they do want to operate here, but the costs to operate here are just, the barrier to entry is just too large. They've made it very difficult. What was your question was related to?
It was just
like
more,
how is Bitcoin going to be here in 5,
transactions
10
going to
years?
become more common?
You won't see them. Like, so, if you ask me how many websites are there going to be? If you ask me that in 1995, it's not really relevant. Like, Bitcoin will just be on the back end. It'll be part of the infrastructure. It'll be layer one. Just like TCP/IP is layer one, is in technology, and then you build layers on it. You build all these layers on technology. Same thing with Bitcoin. We're already on layer 2 of Bitcoin. There's Lightning Network. There's other networks and things being built on top of Bitcoin. There'll be 3rd, 4th, 5th layers. At the end of the day, normal everyday people probably won't even know they're using Bitcoin, and they'll be using it every single day. Companies like his that are doing supply chain and things like that on the back end and maybe using Bitcoin, you don't even know. Why do you care? It doesn't matter. So I think Bitcoin will just become nothing, just like the internet is today. Nobody thinks much of it anymore. But in 1994, it was wow. What is this thing going to be? Nobody could have guessed. So a lot of the correlations between the adoption of Bitcoin and the internet has been done, and we're only 10 years into Bitcoin, and we're so much further ahead than even the internet. And to me, Bitcoin is much more disruptive than even the internet.
And I guess the U.S. is a little bit different animal too than like El Salvador or Honduras and other countries.
Well, definitely.
I read a couple of days ago that Lightning was being kicked off down in Argentina. So, they're expanding those operations. Now, you and I both, excuse me, have been to downtown El Zante, kind of one of the places where a lot of this started in El Salvador. And I have personally seen the benefits of Bitcoin in El Salvador. And it's amazing to hear some of the stories of people that have been impacted. Can you talk a little bit about that? You're obviously in El Salvador right now and have.
Well, I'm only here one day, but I was talking to Jose last night, and he's dealing with a lot of the government here, and 10% increase GDP. That's huge, and it may actually be 11%. They don't have the final numbers yet. That's made a difference. That's everyone in Central Latin America has taken notice to this because they're not doing that. Nobody's doing this, right? The United States is having 7% inflation. We're falling apart. And you got this country that just adopted Bitcoin as its national currency that's growing by leaps and bounds, and money flowing in like you've never seen. So we're here. We see people from Mexico and lots of different countries are here talking to them about how do we do this back home? How do we do this? How do we get out of the World Bank's thumb? And how do we free ourselves like you've done? And it's going to be an interesting year.
So we have Bitcoin City in El Salvador. We're going to have a Bitcoin City in Paraguay and Honduras and Argentina. All those things are possibilities. And, I personally talk to people that have had no access to banking, no way to do financial transactions down in El Salvador. And now they can. And it's totally changed their life. And it was an amazing thing to see.
That was one of the things that we saw here when we got here was 80% of the company, or I think it's 80% are unbanked. I don't know what that number is anymore, but a large majority of people, there are no banks. If you go to El Zante, there is no bank, there is no ATM machine, there is no anything. So it doesn't matter if you did have a bank account, you can't use it. Nobody uses it. It's a cash, everything's cash. So, and then they ran out of cash. So they started using Bitcoin, and then they started using Lightning because Bitcoin was too expensive, and yada, yada, yada. It's tremendous. Now that I'm here again, you're seeing a huge impact that people were afraid of it before. They didn't, like, oh my gosh, how am I going to collect this for my business? I'm in a cab coming home. I was like, hey, do you take Bitcoin? Yeah, sure. when you come into the airport, yeah, they take Bitcoin. This one takes Bitcoin. So I'll see how it actually works this time, because last time I was here, 6 months ago, things were just starting to be adopted. So it'd be interesting to see where it is. McDonald's, I gotta go get a coffee at McDonald's and pay in Bitcoin. Walmart.
Go to
There's a Walmart down the
Starbucks.
street here. I'm gonna go to
Starbucks,
Walmart and get some
not
stuff.
McDonald's.
No, I'm gonna go to Starbucks too. Starbucks takes Bitcoin too. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
does.
amazing to see that change. And now everybody, like you said, you're outside of San Salvador in particular. There's no banks or ATMs but you have a smartphone. I mean, who doesn't have a smartphone? Even in countries like El Salvador, it's all over the place.
Well,
And
everyone is,
leveraging that technology is amazing.
and that's one of the other things. So they started launching the satellites to provide internet access to the schools, to the remote schools and things like that. But that's actually super important to the infrastructure of Bitcoin as well. So they have like line of sight satellites that they've built for a lot of this stuff. So pretty much everything's wired up here.
So Arun, I've been kind of monopolizing. Don't hesitate to jump in and interrupt too, because I know you have a million questions.
I probably have a couple million. Eric, you talked about Texas and New York, and it sounds like Texas trying to kind of get ahead, especially with their hopefully they'll work on their infrastructure and electrical grid infrastructure. Where do you see Florida in that? Since I live in Florida, I know Tracy in Florida. Where do you see Florida from that perspective? I just would like to get your opinion on that.
Florida's a business-friendly state. However, towards Bitcoin, the problem is a lot of the regulatory stuff is delegated to people. And so, like, perfect examples in Florida now has just reinterpreted a law that they had. They tried to pass a law, couldn't get it passed, and they decided to reinterpret an existing law to fit their model. And now, so I run a Bitcoin ATM company. If you run Bitcoin ATMs in Florida, as of January 1st, they decided, yeah, you got to register. You got to get your MTL license here, which is very costly and time consuming. And frankly, there's no need for it, which I don't want to get into. So Florida, as a whole, they just turned unfriendly. They we have like a chart of states that are Bitcoin, what we call Bitcoin friendly, and they just went to the red. They're one of the states that you need to register in and go through this whole process. And
there's a lot of regulations, sounds like it. Yeah, understood. And there's another aspect, I'm sorry to track back. You kept mentioning when it comes to the US, there's a lot of cost to possibly implement Bitcoin as a business altogether comparing to other countries. Am I correct about that?
So Bitcoin is from a compliance standpoint, right? So most anti-money laundering, know your customer, they don't have this in a lot of places. In the United States, we have FinCEN on a federal level, and then on state level, we have different regulatory agencies on a state level. And so when I'm talking about costs, I'm talking about that there's a barrier to entry, that you need to have an anti-money laundering program. You have to have a dedicated compliance officer. You have to do some things in the United States that you don't necessarily have to do in other jurisdictions.
So from a compliance standpoint, yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I'm strictly talking legal and structural. I'm not talking like the programmers, most of the developers we hire are offshore anyway. That's the same.
Right. And just a final question regarding all that is inflation. We talked before our meeting regarding inflation. You and Tracy also mentioned inflation and hyperinflation. How do you feel Bitcoin can help us with the inflation crisis? I just feel in the future, if we'll be able to add more Bitcoin and decentralize money, it might reduce that inflation aspect. It might, because it sounds like it's increasing every year. And
there is no inflation in Bitcoin, right? So you only have 21 million Bitcoins that will ever be released. Nobody's going to change that. How many dollars are there out there? Nobody even knows. How many are they going to print this year? Nobody even knows. So what is that number? We don't know. Okay. So what does it buy you? That's what we base it on, because we can't figure out how much there is, like how many dollars are out there, which they print dollars. The banks, now we have 0% fractional reserve banking. The banks don't need to have any reserves. They just lend, they just borrow money at 0 or less than 0%, lend it out, and they need no reserves. That's creation of money as well, right? That's the Federal Reserve can't print the money fast enough, so they use the banks at 0% fractional reserve. So that's how you inject a ton of money into the market. You can't do that in Bitcoin. So in my personal opinion, Bitcoin is the best inflation hedge in the world. And historically, it's proven that, and we'll see what happens in the next couple of years. I think Bitcoin will really prove itself in the next couple of years.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your feedback, Eric. I'm back to you, Tracy.
So Eric, you touched on something. You talked about AML, the anti-money laundering laws. And one of the things you see, again, you go back to the doomsayers on about Bitcoin that talk about, Bitcoin's where all the drug money is going to go and money laundering and all this other crap. And I'm curious if you want to comment on that, because I think there's a lot of misinformation.
Well, they said the same thing about the internet, right? The only people who use the internet are pornographers and drug traffickers, right? Well, is that true? I mean, they're on there, but is that what the internet is? No. And Bitcoin's the same thing. It's money. So it's saying that it's going to be used. It's because it's so easy to transfer money between people. We can't have that. We have to have the government in the middle saying, you can't send to this person. You got FATF where anything over $3,000 is tracked. Now they want to track $600 in your bank. Who wants to be tracked? Why would you want this? Why would you want to use money that is, you can't send to who you want to send it to? You can't do with it what you want to do. They can take it from you whenever they want. Versus, and they print it like it's going out of style. So they're literally devaluing it and stealing it from you. That does not sound like a good asset to be holding versus Bitcoin. 21 million, that's all that's ever going to be released. Nobody can control it. Nobody can confiscate it. Nobody can stop you from sending it to somebody. If Tracy held up a QR code in this meeting right now, I could send it to him and I don't need a bank. I don't need to go walk. I don't need to do anything. I pick up my phone and send it to him. You can't do that at a bank. You're lucky if you go to the bank, you can wire money and it gets through, right? So it's a world of difference. So the better system will prevail. Bitcoin is by far the best financial system we've ever seen, and it'll win the day.
That's interesting, because I think, just as you're saying, I think the problem, at least that I see here, is the government here wants to track every little thing you do. They don't even want cash currency. If you try to do a cash business, God help you in this country, right? Your bank will dump you in a heartbeat. As anybody that's a heavy cash business knows, it's a real pain. They've
spent decades building a system around tracking people, right?
Sure.
So law enforcement tracks the money. That's how most of the crimes are. They track the money. The IRS is a big law enforcement. They track the money, and so they're the ones that want to keep doing it the way they've been doing it, and they don't want things to change. And not just them. I mean, a lot of people, but in particular them, because it impacts them probably more than anyone else. Like, how are they going to track this stuff? You're not. The answer is you're not, and you're going to have to go back to old police work of tracking down criminals, because the way of transferring money and controlling the banks and controlling the money like that just isn't going to work anymore. Just like the phone system, lots of things have been disrupted in the past, and this is no different.
And the big banks that are the ones that are tied directly to the Federal Reserve and all, all the data that flows through them, it's all monitored and tracked, and they like it that way. But at the end of the day, it's a losing proposition. And something like Bitcoin is honestly seen as a threat, but it's not a threat to the average person. It's a benefit to all of us.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see a lot of people think Bitcoin is going to replace the dollar. I don't see it replacing the dollar. I think this water is still going to be $1, but I'm going to pay for it in another asset because I don't trust the dollar, right? So it could be denominated in something. That's what currency is. I mean, people forget, just like insurance and a lot of different things, we've created like these Frankensteins. Our money is a Frankenstein. It's not just money anymore, right? It's not this fungible thing. I would make the argument, money is supposed to be fungible, which means $1 is $1 is $1. No, it's not. One paper dollar is not worth one digital dollar. One digital dollar is infinitely worth more, because if you try to spend those dollars, they don't like it, right? So it's not fungible. And so why would you want this whole complex system versus I own it, nobody can take it, and nobody can print more of it and devalue it? That's where I want to put my money, and that's where the wealthy put their money. I mean, so let's talk about what inflation does. Inflation, the value of an asset goes up, and the money you owe on it is worth less. So if I buy a house for $200,000 and I have a $100,000 mortgage on that thing, and that house goes up to $250,000, I still owe that $100,000. No, even better. That $100,000 isn't even $100,000 anymore. If you have 7% inflation, like as they say, that means it went down by 7%. So in that 30-year mortgage, I mean, imagine what the dollar is going to be worth in 30 years. Like, there's going to be I don't even know if it'll be around, but if it is, it's got so many zeros on it that. So
I think You touched on something I've had conversation with people about because they're like, oh, Bitcoin's not real. And I'm like, and the dollar is. It's a piece of paper. We went off the gold standard in 1933, or the rest of it was what, early 70s or something that they finished it
71,
off.
yeah.
But the dollar is nothing but a piece of paper. It means nothing
Worse,
except the U.S.
worse.
government says we're going to stand behind this. Okay,
No,
it's
it's even worse than that. It's a Federal Reserve note. It's actually debt. It's our currency has turned into debt. How that happens on a balance sheet, I'm not really sure how you do that, but our currency is a debt. So we issue treasury bonds to represent the money that we printed, and we're paying that to everybody in the world. It's absolutely amazing. Yeah. If
It is.
what people laugh like, oh, I never knew it worked like that. Well, that's by design. You think they're going to teach you that in school? If everyone understood how the system worked, the system would stop working tomorrow. So how do you keep a system like that going? Bad information, fear.
Talk a little more about the dollar and Bitcoin, because if you listen to some of the politicians and again the doomsayers about all this, and Bitcoin could disrupt or destabilize the U.S. dollar and all this stuff. I think there's a relationship between the two that isn't necessarily bad. If anything, perhaps Bitcoin could help stabilize the dollar and even help guarantee its position as the world's reserve currency, which currently, frankly, is under threat. So, your thoughts?
Agree. Talking about like Frankenstein money, like the petrodollar that all these countries need to convert to dollars in order to trade a commodity, and that we force them to do that, right? So a lot of countries are now opting out of that stuff, and so the U.S. dollar it's done it to itself. Bitcoin is not going to be the death of the dollar. The dollar did it to itself. But I do think that Bitcoin saves what we call the dollar, not the dollar as it is today, the way they print it in the government, but the denomination of value. Like, everyone needs to understand, like, if I make $20 an hour, I need to understand that these headsets are going to cost me a half an hour of labor. And that's what currency needs to represent, that transfer of value of my labor, of my time. So if we look at the dollar as what it's supposed to function as, and we apply Bitcoin to the payment problem, I think it saves it. But there's too many moving parts. So we'll see. I think part of me really believes that the U.S. dollar has just done so much damage to itself and it's beyond saving, but we shall see.
So let's go back a little bit, kind of more, I guess you could say, to the root a little bit around blockchain. And if I were having supply chain problems, like everybody else, everybody pretty much is today, what would be the benefit of taking our supply chain perhaps and putting on the blockchain, and how is that good for our company, or maybe a competitive advantage at this point? Because not everybody's doing that, even though it's growing. What does that mean in reality to a company to go on blockchain?
I mean, it depends on the use case. We did a couple of projects in Moldova. They had a counterfeiting problem with wine. And so one of the things that they wanted to do was, Moldova has really good wine, but they can't sell it because there's a counterfeiting problem. So they use supply chain to solve their counterfeiting problem, that they can prove that this wine came from this place. Here's where the grapes came from. Here's where the wine came from. And in this case, it was interesting because we had a wine bottle. You could put the private key on the cork and a public key on the outside. So once they used it, you knew it was done. And so somebody couldn't sell that same bottle somewhere else, and it was tracked all the way through it. So that's how that would solve that problem. So then there was a British company that was looking to import the wine, and they were able to do it now because they could prove that it wasn't counterfeited. Like they were concerned about their reputational risk. What if they're buying counterfeit stuff? Or even here in El Salvador, right? We're going to do a coffee project here, slave labor, right? Fair trade. How do you prove that the coffee was fairly paid for? Blockchain, right? So that's going to be a solution that we're going to approach here. But I don't think it solves all the supply chain issues as far as what's going on today. I think going on today is just shipping issues are predominantly what's causing the supply chain. I don't know that it can fix, it can't fix that, but it certainly can better track where the items are in the process and things like that. And there already are very good supply chain things outside of blockchain, but putting them on the blockchain creates transparency to the world, that anybody can validate that, and it can't be hacked and it can't be changed. So that the information that's there is true and valid. So, it depends on what kind of supply chain and what you're looking for. Counterfeiting, certainly. Proof of where it came from, yes, or proof of some kind of something that you've done with the product. Yeah, those are definitely things that are easy to do in blockchain.
So another thing around blockchains we that's become really popular, and I'm kind of intrigued and puzzled a little bit by NFTs. Talk about what the heck is an NFT and why would you spend money on something?
All right. Well, so an NFT is a non-fungible token. So let's talk about what fungible and non-fungible. I think I mentioned fungible before. Fungible means one is the same as the same. So in theory, this headset is the same as another headset as another headset as another headset. So that would be fungible. However, this headset is different than this headset. So this is a non-fungible versus this. This is a different asset than this. So that's what a non-fungible asset is it's a unique asset. So whether it's your car, a house, my headset, my car, my computer, whatever it is, that's a non-fungible token asset, but non-fungible token. So they create tokens that represent unique assets, and then you're able to trade them. So what you're hearing about. So we did NFTs years ago because it's just a term that's popular today, but the concept is the same. And so you're seeing a lot of the NFTs happening in art and music, and actually someone I'm here with is big into the NFT space and owns quite a portfolio of musicians and artists, and that's NFT is definitely going to be the buzzword for this year. It's and validly so. There's lots of interesting opportunities that you can take with NFTs. I'm not going to get too deep into that, but just ownership of a collectible, like what Disney. I would imagine Disney gets head deep into this. They're one of the biggest collectibles. There's going to be a lot of different NFTs that come out. I mean, we just saw the Associated Press is going to NFT their images. I think that's huge. Who would have thought? So you were asking me about, is the Bitcoin to be adopted in the United States? Yeah, like this. You don't even know. I don't know. Is that Bitcoin? Is that Ethereum? Is that Avalanche? I don't know what they're using for that, nor do I care, right? Because you can go on there and buy it. It's pretty interesting. So yeah. So I don't know what you want to know about NFTs. Are they here to stay? Absolutely. It's an idea, but it's probably one of the most powerful ideas, because now you can take a non-fungible token and attribute like a DAO products and things like that, and put it under these tokens and ownership of cars, houses, whatever you want, and then put them into these organizations, which are also decentralized, the DAOs.
It's an interesting concept. I'm puzzled by it sometimes.
It's just getting started. Yeah. Now that people hear about it, they see the opportunities. People that are in spaces that especially music, art, they're all over this thing, so they don't want to be left behind.
So besides Bitcoin, of course, there's a lot of different cryptocurrencies out there. Some, most actually, I think, are rather questionable. And but there's we have Dogecoin. We know people that are real fanatics over that, and others, and there's a fairly impolite term for things that aren't Bitcoin related to a lot of the Bitcoin maxis, as we often call them, use. But what's your thoughts?
No, even people that buy them call them shitcoins. Let's face it.
Exactly, that's exactly what that's the term. and what are your thoughts on that, on these other cryptos? Because I've had people text me going, "Oh, I saw this cool thing coming up in crypto, and I'm want to invest." And I'm usually like, "Yeah, don't stick to Bitcoin, guys. The return on investment, the ROI is proven over time." I'm more of a safety guy, but there's others that aren't. So, what are your thoughts if you're looking as a company or even as an individual around investing in crypto? I know you're not a financial advisor, but just more opinion on other cryptos.
Yeah, I'm not going to give financial advice, but for me, these altcoins are interesting sandboxes to play in, and a lot of great innovation can come out of those things, and some of them have very specific use cases and work well at that. Some of them do things better. Right now we're trying to figure out who's going to be the smart contracting king. It's Ethereum today, but there's like 1 million of Ethereum forks, which are basically where people took Ethereum and just created their own Ethereum. And I don't know, what do I think about it? I love it. I'm not a Bitcoin maxi. I do believe Bitcoin is the king and it'll be here to stay, but that doesn't mean that these other projects shouldn't pop up. Now, investing in them, no. I mean, if you're going to invest in them, do it like the VCs do and put a little bit into a whole bunch of them, because 99 out of 100 of them are probably going to fail. It'll just be that one that'll make up for it. And if you're not going to don't do it just because you think the project is a good idea. There's too much other stuff that's going on. How many developers, there's just so much going on with that stuff. But as an investment, I would never recommend it to people. Stay with the big one. Stay with the top 10 cryptos, and definitely until you have a whole Bitcoin, don't even touch anything else.
And I think on top of that, Bitcoin too, is we're seeing international adoption. It's setting the standard. And I personally, unless you just want to, you're 20 years old and don't really care if you lose $1,000, hey, do what you want. But if you're looking for long-term investment and long-term growth, Bitcoin's the place to go.
Yeah, Bitcoin's the reserve currency of crypto, and it's going to be the index of when Bitcoin goes up, the whole market goes up. When it goes down, the whole market's going to go down, and that's probably not going to change for the foreseeable future because it's ginormous compared to the other cryptos. It's $800 billion on a $2 trillion market, so it owns a large share of the market, and most pairs are traded against it. Ethereum certainly is making a lot of headway there, but frankly, Ethereum is too expensive and it's not usable in its current state. And if they fix it, that's the way it's going to be.
So if I'm an international company and I'm, I have suppliers around the world and I move things around the world, Bitcoin to me seems to be the payment method of choice, if you will. Right now, if I need to pay somebody in China or Thailand or wherever, it can be almost a nightmare. I've got to wire money and just getting money. You
can't send Bitcoin to China either. They're not allowed to take it as payment. So
that's true. China's put restrictions on their end.
A lot of countries have, but it still happens. Still, the number one user I think still is China of Bitcoin. They can't use it.
Well, I think China's put all these restrictions in, and what's going to happen is a couple of years from now, suddenly China's going to do an about face and become the biggest miner out there again because they'll see all the profit.
No, they're doing their own currency. They've got their own central bank currency that they're gonna force on everyone. The U.S. will probably do that at some point as well.
That brings up actually a good topic. We've seen, I believe, other countries, if you will, out there that are talking about things like stable coins. What is a stable coin?
A stable coin is something denominated in dollars, pesos, or some other, usually in dollars. So like USDT. So different stable coins have different ways of approaching that. But what it should represent is one of those tokens should equal $1 US. So as the US dollar does this stays with it. So one of the issues in Bitcoin is the on-ramp, the getting into the crypto space. But once you're in there, you don't really want to get out because it's very costly and time consuming. So let's say you wanted to get out of Bitcoin for a short period, you would go into USDT or one of these stable coins, and then the market would, Bitcoin would go up, and now you'd be sitting here in dollars, but not out of crypto. So you could immediately jump back in versus the way you'd have to do it today, which is you got to wire the money from the bank to your exchange account, and then you can make your purchase. And then when you want to sell it, the other way around. So this bypasses that, and you're able to trade it there. It's also used for a lot of different different things, but that's its main use case is a hedge against the volatility of the cryptos and representing dollars, pesos, fiat currency. Some of them do it by actually backing it $1, having dollars in reserves, like Tether claims they have dollars backing all of that, or DAI, which has or Maker's DAI, or there's different ways of making sure that you stabilize your asset. But a stablecoin is basically a representation of fiat. It's an NFT of fiat.
Wow, I've never heard it described that way, but
it's
now
not really. That's
fiat NFT. Okay, that's an interesting term.
It's a digital representation of fiat, like I say, and should be fungible. So it's not really an NFT, but it's a fungible token. I don't know what you call it, but yeah.
You use the term fiat, and we mentioned that a few times in the conversation. A lot of people may not know what fiat actually is. You want to explain that a little bit?
It's worthless money. It's money not backed by anything, basically. It's money that they create out of thin air, and that's since 1971. Nixon took off silver. The world and the world didn't notice. They were like, wait, they did it. Nobody cared. And so the rest of the world basically adopted. Every country in the world now has fiat currency. Nobody has sound money.
Well, removing that restriction, let them print all the money they want.
Right.
The gold standard.
Well, that's the only way. That's the only way that
so
the dollar died in 19. Yeah, the dollar died in 1971. They didn't have the U.S. didn't have enough assets to back the dollar anymore, so they couldn't continue. So they had no choice. What are they going to do? And they came up with a creative way that nobody really normal people didn't understand what was going on. And they could still go to the grocery store and buy $10 worth of products. Okay, nothing changed.
Right.
And then people accepted
that. In reality, it was an enormous change. And now we've seen, as you said, in the last year or so, we've had 40% of the currency in circulation has been printed.
Well, you look at the history of the dollar itself. I mean, the dollars. It's
But that's we're not the only country that does that, though. I mean, that's kind of almost the norm, if you will, around the world. Is just we just print money and say, "Oh, here's 1,000, no problem." But then you see some other countries that have had these hyperinflation for years, where when I was in South America back in the 80s, the currency in one of the countries I was in had been devalued to the point that if you wanted to go buy a Volkswagen, you would have to have a couple of suitcases of cash.
Venezuela that's where Venezuela is right now. Brazil might be not far behind it. I mean, the inflation. So a lot of these countries can't even do the fiat because people don't trust them enough, right? They've already destroyed. Like Venezuela is a perfect example. Nobody's going to trust them if they came out with a new bolivar or whatever. Like, who cares? We don't want to hear it. We already know what's going to happen to that money as well. And so a lot of them give up. And then what they do is they take they just adopt the US dollar as their currency, like El Salvador did, or they create a currency that's tied to the dollar, like the Bermudian dollar, right? So the Bermudian dollar is tied to, so they do that because they can't sustain it on their own. Unfortunately for them, as the US is printing all that money, it impacts them 10 times worse. So you think the US is going to have hyperinflation? If El Salvador hadn't switched to Bitcoin here, you'd see the same thing here, because that flood of dollars would impact here more so than even in the United States. But we'll see.
So in El Salvador, we've seen a massive increase in GDP, but we've seen, because of Bitcoin, they're managing inflation better than we are. And it's just a huge win for the country. I'm looking forward to coming back down myself.
Well, they had no capacity to manage inflation because they had no control over the money. So they were dependent on the United States, and the World Bank decided what would happen to them. And so I think the president has said it many times, they weren't treated very well. And so why wouldn't they try something else? Because
the G8 like to be the bankers of the world so that they can call the shots. And you have a little country now like El Salvador that said, sorry, we're tired of playing your game. And now look at the growth they're having, the prosperity that's coming to their people. That's amazing.
And that's another chink in the armor, right? Eventually, there are definitely other countries here in Latin America that will be following suit and doing the exact same thing here shortly, and Africa as well. And once that starts to happen, the dominoes start falling, and people start seeing, hey, you're in this old system, you moved to this new system, all of a sudden your GDP went up, your unemployment went down, everything's, wow, why wouldn't you want to do that? Well, you wouldn't want to do that if you're G8 because you have a lot to lose. But these countries, smaller countries like this that don't have much to lose, they're going to jump on this.
Great. Sargon, you have any other questions that you want to ask?
No, I think I'm good. I'm just, very intrigued by this great conversation. You kind of asked all the questions I had, Tracy. No, I think I'm good. I just see us, like you said, Eric, at one point there will be pressure from other countries and domino effect on the US. And with that being said, at one point, whether the regulations has to be changed or they need to
they're not going to change.
At one point, it would be an external pressure. At one point, it will be an external pressure rather than. But again,
I don't think so. Yeah, we're very isolationist when it comes to pressure from the outside and changing regulations.
It reminds me of China. You mentioned China. You said they might have their own currency, digital currency.
Yeah, they have their own digital currency. So they created what's called a central bank digital currency, which is a stable coin issued by the central bank there. So they're already doing this, right? They understand Bitcoin as a threat to the yuan. So they address it by creating a digital currency like that and
And
outlawing
you
Bitcoin.
and you feel the U.S. possibly can do that as well as
We're
an
already talking about
internal
doing it. The U.S. was going to on the first not stimulus. What was the payout?
stimulus
The
check?
Was that a stimulus check? Yeah, okay. The first stimulus check, the first proposal was actually creating a U.S. digital currency. It was in the bill. They took it out because they knew they couldn't do it in time. But because they were trying to figure out how are we gonna distribute this to all the Americans? Like, yeah, this is gonna be an insane endeavor. And they're like, well, why don't we? We wanted to create they want to create the digital currency, and they've been wanting to do it. So let's use this as an excuse. But they realized, they're never going to get it done in time because it's government, right? So they're not going to get it done. But it was in there, and they definitely want to do it, and they've talked about doing it, and a lot of the Federal Reserve people have talked about it. But it'll happen, 100%. It's going to happen. When? I don't know, but it will.
Yeah.
Russia, China, quite a few countries are adopting central bank digital currencies, and you're going to see a lot more of those this year. Some countries that I can't talk about have also.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and hopefully, like you said, hopefully it will help us with inflation and hopefully, reduce the unemployment, not necessarily in the US, but across the globe. Talking about that, working on inflation and unemployment, how do you see the interaction between, like, for example, the Chinese digital currency versus Bitcoin? You'll be able to kind of do a form of an exchange, or how that would work?
In theory, yes. But knowing China, their digital currency is tracked, and they'll be able to claw it back. So if you did something like that, you may lose all your money.
Yeah.
I wouldn't trust using the Chinese digital currency to do anything. Will the Chinese people take it and convert it to Bitcoin? Yep, you betcha, 100%. Well, they'll find ways. There'll be black markets. There'll be whatever it takes in order to do that, 100%. They don't trust their government. It's funny as China and Russia announce that they're outlawing Bitcoin, you see the Google spikes go up and the adoption in the countries go up. So they just stop talking about it. But every now and then, China comes out and says, "We banned Bitcoin again." For the 20th time, like the South Park episode. Will they fall for it again? Yeah, sure, somebody will.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I don't know. I wouldn't trust it, nor would I trust the U.S. Digital currency. It'll have the same mechanisms in place. They're going to embed into that a tracking mechanism. They're going to embed into that a way to call it back. They're going to embed into it all the stuff that you don't want. Who wants that stuff? I want money that's mine. It's mine. Why do I have to ask permission? Why do I have to go through these processes? It's mine. I want to spend it and do it. I earned it. Why can't I spend it?
Sure. Going back to that centralized idea, they want to make it centralized, even though it's digital, so they can always control it and bring it back.
And that's the problem. And they can't get out of that mind. And that's the problem government has all the time when we're talking to them, is getting out of that mindset of centralizing everything, putting the moat around. Guys, we got airplanes. Putting a moat around the castle is not going to stop this, right? You got to adopt something to take care of the airplanes. And they don't see it like that. They just keep, we'll just build a second layer of a moat. Then, no, that's not going to work.
It reminded me of a conversation I just had with Tracy regarding Apple. I'm not sure if it's really a good analogy, but if it's like if you always over supervise, you're not allowing everyone else to thrive on in the team. And same thing for that. When you have so much control, you're not letting opportunity for growth and for everyone to kind of get to the next level. Just because of all these constraints. But once you let it all in, all out, and be transparent, and it would take it to the next level, and it will help take.
Well, I think I don't think it'll be external resources. I think at some point Americans will demand this, that they're gonna, like, this is nonsense. Like what, like my bank accounts get canceled. Like you can't wire money. You can't do like basic things that you need to do. And why? And so, eventually people are going to get fed up with all of this nonsense that's going on, and there's a better system there, and it's just sitting there waiting, and people just have to adopt it. Now, it'll happen outside of the United States first, like it is here in El Salvador, but then people in the United States are going to take notice of this when these countries are becoming prosperous, and we're having 15-20% inflation that the government's claiming, but it's like, we're have hyperinflation, and we're watching other countries prosper. Why? Their money is sound, and we don't have sound money. And people are going to recognize that when they can't afford groceries and they can't afford rent, and it's really gotten bad. But until then, we have this concept of a working system, I guess.
True. Thank you so much.
I sound doom and gloom here.
Oh man,
I'm actually pretty optimistic. I just don't think government has a role in money anymore. I think that's the separation of church and state, and the separation of money and state is going to become a very important thing in the future, because as we know, government doesn't do anything very well. So why would we trust it with our money? There's a better system. I'd rather use it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, guys, again, we're kind of at the end of our time here. I really appreciate both of you joining in. And Eric, I know you probably didn't have a whole lot of sleep last night because you got in late, but I really appreciate you getting up early for us. And good luck down in El Salvador again. And looking forward to hearing the latest and newest things going on down there.
Yeah, it should be interesting. Definitely a fun ride.